Recording to the cloud. Okay. Hi. I'm interviewing today Heather Young, and I met Heather at the Unschooling and Decolonization online conference that happened in December, called the True Community. Is that right? Or the True Earth-wide Gathering, I think is actually what it's called. And I wanted to interview Heather because I don't know, I just felt like we had a lot of interesting kind of common ground in terms of what we're interested in. And I'll tell you what I know about her, and then I'm going to let her kind of expand on that and fill in the background. Um, Heather's a continuum teacher, therapist kind of thing, and also runs a self-directed learning program and has a background doing expressive arts work and is an unschooling mom of a teenager, um, and lives on the west coast of the United States. Um, so, um, yeah, so Heather, I don't know if you can just sort of like maybe explain to people a little bit about um, your background, how you got into doing, this sort of somatic or body mind work. And if people kind of don't know what continuum is, maybe you could just give them a quick explanation of it. Yeah. And then just tell us how you got into this world.
Well, thank you, Amahla. I'm super excited to get a chance to speak with you. It's such a lovely thing to meet with like-minded people like yourself in the True group. So thank you for this opportunity to have this conversation. Gosh, let's see. I mean, when you ask, how did I get into this work? It's like, well, how far back do we go? Because, I also work with constellation practices. And so I'm very aware of these deeper layers that call us back, that speak to us from the past, and on my mother's side, my grandparents were a doctor and a nurse. And on my father's side, my parents were artists. So I feel like those two ancestral streams kind of met in me and have been unfolding in different ways. And one of those ways I feel is through through finding movement practices that are healing, and also through, finding ways of living in creative integrity with myself and life. And so, that's taken many different twists and turns over the years. I guess going back to my own childhood, I was 5, and my next oldest sister, I have 2 older sisters. My middle sister was 11, and at that time she'd been not well for a while, but the doctors could not figure out what was going on. And finally, at around 11 years old, when she was really gravely ill, they just finally decided she had lupus and diagnosed her. So at that time, being 5, I didn't, of course, really fully understand what was going on. And but I'm talking about this because I think when I think about why my life has unfolded the way it has, I definitely feel that was such a strong movement in my early life. Illness and death was very present in my childhood home. And the way I kind of coped with that was I'd go outside and move my body. I'd go and climb the tree in the backyard. I'd go out front and practice gymnastics. And I just would spend hours doing those activities, because my mom was busy inside with my sister. And it really became it was a healthy, surviving mechanism that arose in me early on. And so I got seriously into gymnastics and as a kid, and then transitioned into dance and danced seriously for 15 years, and then transitioned into more healing arts type movements, yoga, Pilates, body, mind centering, Feldenkrais, all those kinds of practices. I started exploring authentic movement. And as I explored those over the years, kind of one kind of just kept, um, see like the ocean wave coming in and going back out, the next wave comes in, like they kept overlapping on each other and coming into my life at different times. I think as I was, going through my different ages and stages and had different needs, different movement practices would kind of, I'd be drawn to them or they'd find me, so gosh, after I left, finished college and a master's degree in consciousness studies, I really didn't know exactly what I was going to do to earn a living, and I'd been working with children and teaching and so on and so forth for some time, and so I thought maybe I would teach, but that's not what ended up happening. I actually just didn't feel in alignment with the schools, which it's not a big surprise as things have turned out now. And so I started doing what I knew how to do, which was be in my body and help others to learn about that. And at that time, yoga was really taking off. So I started working. I was, I got a yoga teacher's teaching credential and then a yoga therapy credential as well. And that was more my specialty, is working with therapeutic yoga. And and then I was also uh, certified in Pilates, and that's where, when I started doing the one-on-one Pilates work, because it was one-on-one with people, my healing practice really started becoming very kind of, I would say, idiosyncratic. Like I really started developing my own way of just being with people and finding what was working in the dynamic between us when they came to me. And people always would come with usually some kind of physical pain, and that's why they were coming, is just trying to, like, let's fix this pain I have in my body. And as I did that over the years, it was just, of course, it took me deeper and deeper and deeper. And what do you find is that the pain is related not just to physical things that have happened in that person's life and body, but more often than not, by far, it's related to, what our mental state is, what is our emotional state, what happened when we were growing up, what happened to our parents when they were growing up, all of these layers, and how that's retained in the body and expressed in the body became obvious to me, after working with all these different bodies in my own over the years. And so that's also what I think, partly also then led me to constellation work and ancestral work, is feeling these deeper layers that are at work and like just wanting to explore that some more. And doing the constellation work really informed my body work a lot too. That's a whole conversation. So about 10 years ago, 10 or 12 years ago, I started doing Continuum. And that has now, for the last decade or so, been really my main movement practice. It kind of informs all my other movement practices, whatever that may be, whether I'm like just, natural movement, doing gardening or taking a hike or whatever, or if I'm doing more formal movement, yoga or Pilates or something, the Continuum informs all of that. And then some, going into those deeper layers of what the fascial body holds and so on. So, so that's what comes to mind for right now.
Oh, I love how you made just this beautiful connection from like sort of like childhood, you know, kind of like, the motivations and the seeds, and then all the way through and all the things you've studied. It's kind of incredible. And then to also tie it to the ancestral layers and I just think it's so great. Is it okay if I just sort of ask you a few questions, just from hearing that? Well, one thing that strikes me that's as so wonderful is how much as a child you just intuitively went to those things that were going to help you to, to cope and deal, and then how that really just like how that just built on itself, bigger and bigger and bigger. I just think that's so, I love that, um just that story, because I feel like so many people do in their childhood kind of gravitate to whatever degree that their environment allows them. They gravitate towards these answers that are not, they're not coming from their mind, right? But their body knows what to do. Um, but yeah, I also really liked how you made the connection that someone's personal pain can be not from their own lifetime, that it can come from, generations before. I think that's a really important point. And then the question I really want to ask you is, um, just to talk more about actually the connection between the constellation work and Continuum. I'm really interested in that connection. And I'm also interested because like I know a little bit about Continuum, and I've heard Emily Conrad talk, and I was very kind of drawn to the feeling and the concepts that I heard from her and the way that she expressed things. But I don't actually, like, I haven't done it, so I don't know it from the inside. So I'm trying to understand like how Continuum can inform your, things like hiking. Like, just make that connection for me too, if you can. Like, just how does it, how does it, yeah. And some people listening might not know what Continuum is, so if you could just like flesh that out a little bit.
Okay. That's a lot.
Yeah. So,
So, well, one thing I wanted to say was, so when Emily was still alive, she died, gosh, has it been 6 years ago now? I'm not certain about that. Um, but when she was still here in body, people would train with her, and then there was not actually a set way of becoming a Continuum teacher. When she just knew you long enough and you'd done enough work with her and it just felt right to her, she would just kind of give you the blessing and say, you are now a Continuum. It was not so formalized. And Unfortunately, she left her body before I was able to actually become a Continuum teacher. So I just wanted to clarify that. I have been in the practice for a long time now myself, but I do not use that label. And I do share Continuum with others and tell them exactly where it comes from, and give honor to Emily for being a conduit for what she was able to connect with. And she always gave a lot of honoring to her where she got it from, which, as you probably know, she was a dancer in New York, and then felt kind of like she was looking for something else beyond what the modern dance scene was, giving her. And she ended up going to Haiti and being really invited into the communities there in a very, sacred way, to learn about their dance practices, their ceremony, really. And that's where she kind of became initiated, through, you could say, like the Holy Spirit, of the movement practices that they embody there. And she was able to do that for, there as an integrated part of the community. And when she came back to New York, she brought back this tremendous gift that she was then able to live into for the next 40 years or 50 years, developing what she called Continuum. And it primarily has to do with the fluid body. And so because it's the fluid body, it also has a lot to do with the fascial body. And she talked a lot about the different contexts that we exist within, right down to like the cellular context is fluid. And then right on up to like the universal context, that where water is, that's where life grows. And she would talk about that all water is resonant with all other water. And so literally the water that's in our own cells and flowing through our body is in resonance, in communication with all other water. And so this is, pretty incredible thought to feel into. And then the practice itself is the interfacing of sound that you make yourself with open awareness in the body. So a real just curiosity and very finely tuned interoception. So you make a sound, and there's different sounds that get introduced through the practice of Continuum that are similar to some other practices as well. But you use the sound, and then you pause and you feel what the ripple effect is in the body. And you often might lay your hands on that part of your body where you're intending the sound to particularly go to. And the practice is usually quite long. When practicing in the studio, we would, do at a minimum like hour dives. That would be on the shorter end, to like day-long dive, multiple day-long dives, overnight even, and so on. So it was really kind of almost like exploring alternate, um, spaces in our consciousness, our body mind consciousness. And yet, that being said, just since I'm touching on that kind of altered state point, it was, when practicing Continuum, it does feel very much like you kind of shift into a different kind of way of being and listening to your body / universe. So in that way, it feels altered, but if you want to like pick up the phone because it just rang because you need to, it might be your child calling, whatever, like you can just shift right away. There's no like, in some other practices that I've done to go into these other states, you're kind of out there, and you don't just have like, oh, I can just come back. But in Continuum, it's very clean that way. Like you just can choose. You're very much in yourself, and you can choose clearly whether you're giving yourself to this process completely in this moment, or you want to come back. And so in that way, for how deep it could feel like you were altering your awareness, it also is very not sticky in any way. So that was something else that I enjoyed about it when I first discovered it. And I'm going to shift to that other question that you brought up, the relationship between Continuum and constellation work, because that's a really exciting question for me. Just personally, when I first knew Continuum, I'd been doing Continuum for a couple of years before I discovered Constellation. And in fact, I discovered Constellation work because of somebody at a Continuum workshop telling me about it. That's another story, but another time. But a woman told me about it. She said, "Oh, you should really, check into this." And I was like, "Okay." So I, started finding out about it, and when I discovered, so like with anything, there's many different ways to experience it. Constellation work, depending on who you experience it with, could be very different experiences. The people that I first worked with in Santa Barbara, they, so I don't know if you ever heard of, there was the Santa Barbara Graduate Institute, which was a somatic, one of the earliest programs to offer a PhD in somatics. Unfortunately, they weren't able to stabilize financially, and they closed after several years, but they had been working with that program. So they really were grounded in somatic work. And the way they taught constellation work was through this somatic way of being in it. That's not true for everybody. So for me, when I discovered this form of constellation work, it really resonated with me because it was all about being in your body, feeling what's happening, and that's what you're listening to. It's not anything you're making up in your head at all. As much as possible, you try and get away from that and just really feel into what's happening, in the somatic felt sense, and that's where you're getting your information from. So so when I discovered it, it was it felt so familiar to me from Continuum, and also I'll say from expressive artwork, where you kind of go into a zone of meditative awareness, full body meditative awareness, and you follow the impulses like in authentic movement. And what is it that you're doing when you're doing that? Like, I think I up until constellation work, I had felt like I knew how to do it. Like I'd done it in these different ways, in that way of being, but I didn't really have a word for it necessarily. And when I started working with constellation in that field of work, they call it the knowing field, and it's like kind of like Jung's collective consciousness. It's the field of consciousness, that like everything it has consciousness, is made of consciousness even, and stepping into doing a constellation process, you literally you step into the field of whatever you're representing, and you feel what you feel. And there's something that happens through the meeting of intention and who knows what else in this mysterious world we live in. But it happens that when you set the intention within a context, a contextual field, you can actually feel into information that you would have no way of knowing. And your body's feeling it, and you're able to speak about what you're feeling. And the the people that are involved in this process, can understand things about their own family lineage, and even like internal family or whatever the constellation is about, through a different lens. And that feeling when you feel like something's true, it like you can like feel it in your body. It really resonates and touches something deeply. And so when you're watching a constellation unfold, some things may resonate and others not as much. But when things really resonate, there's kind of no doubting that there's something real happening here. So roundabout way of saying that between constellation work and continuum work, it was moving in the field, going into the field and gathering whatever you could find there, through the somatic felt sense. So.
Wow, so great. Yeah. You're putting a lot of things together for me and helping me to understand different things. Like, so for instance, I've always felt drawn to Continuum, and I think it's because my work is actually very similar. Like, because I'm a sound healer, but I'm feeling everything in my body, and I'm kind of generating the sounds by kind of being directed by what I'm feeling in my body, right? And then that's shifting the energy. I can feel where the energy is going. So now I'm understanding like this open attention uh, is a way to say like I'm feeling what I feel the impact of what's going on in the environment and the actions that I'm taking. Like I'm registering it with my body. Yeah. So anyway, so that's great. Yeah, and so I'm assuming that like when you say, you know, how continuum comes into sort of your movement in your daily life, it has something to do with that open attention.
Yeah. Um, yeah, it has a lot to do with presence. Yeah,
Yeah.
um, I feel like it's fed my capacity to be more present, and um, to really, I don't know, when one of the things like when I work with clients who are less familiar with, um, you know, being that tuned into the internal state, it's a little hard for them sometimes maybe to grasp some of those more subtle layers of how to, it doesn't even feel interesting to try and become more present in that way. Like just doesn't hold any real curiosity. So I feel like when we do these practices that show us, some of the beauty and ways of connecting to that deeper inner felt sense, the interoception, then it starts to excite us about it, and then we become more interested and more curious, and then we get more. Like the more curious, it's a self-perpetuating thing where the more curious and interested you are, the more you get from it. Um, so yeah, I just feel like that way of being in relationship to my own body has helped me to be more curious about my own body. So when I'm when I'm walking down the street, or like feeling a pain in my body that is calling attention to itself, or being with my child or my spouse and like something's bothering me or whatever, like I can reach for that pathway in myself of becoming more present to what's happening inside, and it helps me. It literally changes what I might do in the next moment. And so that's where I feel like my somatic practice or history in the practice of somatic work on a personal level really helped me to to choose unschooling for my child, because I already trusted what my body told me. And so when I from my other, from these back practices, and so when I had a child, and um, I, like I said, or earlier, I was telling you, I did put my child into kindergarten. I didn't know early on necessarily what my path was going to be, but as soon as we were in kindergarten, I was like, this doesn't feel right, and there were many things that my body just said, mm-mm. And so I listened. It was as simple as that, basically. Like, because of the trust I had in my felt sense, I was able to just choose, and it was clear for me. um, and I'm not saying that to like toot my horn at all. I'm just using that as an example of how it really helped me to get more clear on choices and trust my choices, because I could feel that it felt right for me, and that was enough for me to know that it felt right, and I didn't have to like necessarily be able to figure it all out with my brain. And of course, there's always times when we don't feel sure about our choices. That's natural. But coming back to the body over and over again, I feel that's the most reliable source I have for telling me if I'm doing what my soul agrees with or not. So
Yeah, I could just ditto everything that you just said about why I chose like unschooling as well, and my body as being like my barometer and my compass and my for making decisions and stuff like that. And yeah, and as a mother, just how loud that was for me, kind of just and having to kind of move against the values in the environment with just this thing. And I think that's so hard for people to do, and it doesn't make sense for a lot of people, and there is that kind of arguing, and trying to find how they can manage to trust what they feel or act on what they feel when um the social field around them isn't like permitting that.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, that just is, I have, so much compassion for myself, for everybody, because of course those things are extremely real. More than anything, we need to have a sense of belonging and connection and support. And if we're going to go against our context, that we find ourselves in, to try and follow our authentic impulses, we're literally, we're between a total rock and a hard place. How can we do that? So I mean, and that's where finding like-minded communities is so important, to find that support for being able to move more into being able to honor your own embodied choices. Because if you don't have the outside support,
Yeah, it's so hard.
yeah,
Yeah, that's why I'm really loving those unschooling body mind conversations, because um it's such a deep thing and such a important thing to have other people, such a relief, right, to have other people reinforce your own trust of yourself, especially in a place like with your child, because
yeah,
it feels like high stakes, and it feels like all that tension that maybe we normally feel is kind of concentrated in this issue, because
yeah,
your body is speaking so loudly about sort of these primal parenting impulses, and society is also very loud around like how you should be doing it, and your ancestral history, and like what it doesn't mean to break with that, and like what do you have to like uncover and resolve to like to just what layer do you go with, you always feel like you're working towards awareness and constantly feeling like you're just like unsure. Yeah.
yeah. I know, it's huge healing work. And that's why, for me, again, like this concept of context is just, it's so important to the whole thing. That's why, like, working with this self-directed learning community that I'm working with, feels really important, because it's like, you know, um, offering a context for children to be in where they can hopefully, as much as their body, mind, soul is able to, find find their own way, staying connected to their bodily knowing.
Yeah.
Because if you don't have that context, it's basically impossible to stay connected. You have
Yeah.
to choose between like survival and belonging, or staying connected to something that no one's telling you is worth staying connected to, and
Mhm.
in fact actively working to like denigrate that, in many cases. So it's so important to find the right context for ourselves, um, and as much as we can try and provide those contexts for others. And that's right, like what you're doing is helping to provide context for these conversations to take place. And is it we need people to be able to hold those containers, to offer those spaces of permission, um,
Mhm.
and I feel more people are doing it. And so I do feel like it's truly a revolutionary moment that we're in.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. It's like under the surface there. It's like a whole other way of being, a whole other that it's kind of in a way invisible until you drop into it. And then you're like, oh, there's like this whole other world in the same kind of interpenetrating the same space that I didn't know was there.
uh,
Yeah. Yeah, it's really cool. I'm gonna try and like wrap us
okay,
wrap
yeah,
us
we could go
close.
on.
We can just talk forever. But it would be really cool, actually, at some point for me and you and Aitabe to have a conversation.
Yeah,
Um, yeah, and especially to look at this. I feel like the somatic awareness with the ancestral stuff, and the education piece, and just like do a little jam riff on that. Yeah.
I would love that. Yeah, I really would enjoy speaking with Itabe about that. I also have some colleagues, friends here that would be fantastic in these conversations too, that facilitate. One friend in particular who is um, she works specifically with collective healing and constellation work. And
Mm.
we've done some work together on that. And so anyway, I just feel like there's so much so much good stuff we could get into.
Well, I'm so grateful to have met you, and thank you so much for like recording this little interview and all your like amazing, wise, and deep thoughts. And yeah, I'm sure we will talk again sometime soon.
Thank you so much, Amala. I love talking to you. I look forward to the next time.
Okay, I'm gonna I'm gonna stop the recording now. Bye, everybody.